So anyway, it's always great to be back in Evansville. I am a little reluctant, I guess nervous about this topic because it's kind of a dark and twisty topic, but it's a necessary topic because when I usually teach, I teach a class at the law school on domestic violence law and public policy. And my practice as the general counsel for the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence means that, and if you can't hear me in the back, wave and I will try to speak up. It means that I do a lot of direct legal representation for survivors, a lot of legal triage for provider member programs. So, raise your hand if you've ever heard of Albion Fellows Bacon Center. Oh. Yeah, I'm their lawyer. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Crisis Connection. Yeah, so all of the domestic violence direct service providers, YWCA, Albion Fellows, Crisis Connection, YWCA in Northern Indiana, the Julian Center. We have one in almost every other county in the state of Indiana. And what I do as their legal counsel is because they don't have the funds to hire their own attorneys, I work as their general counsel, which means I'm basically available for legal crisis questions, legal crisis calls, and some direct legal services in high lethality cases. My area of expertise is intimate partner violence, but it's expanding to sexual assault and stalking and immigration issues when it comes to victims of crime. And now I'm starting to tinker a little bit more in elder law because what I'm seeing are statistics that are telling me that it's really becoming an important issue and it needs to be addressed. Okay. First of all, let's start out with a few definitions, okay? This is an all-inclusive term, and anytime you're talking about abuse, whether it's intimate partner violence, even sexual assault or stalking, you're talking about larger-than-life terms. Now, the difference between what we consider as domestic violence as a societal ill and what is domestic violence as a crime, as in domestic battery, are very, very different things. So keeping that in mind, the term elder abuse is not a legal term in the sense that it's all illegal. Parts of it are, but we're going to just talk about general terms. Elder abuse is basically a term referring to any kind of behavior that puts another person at risk, and that person is usually someone that is either older or of limited capacity. Okay? When we think of elder abuse, the first thing we think of, the most obvious thing we think of, and I'm not going to read these slides to you, because you can read, I figure. When you think of elder abuse, the first thing you think of is the most drastic things, which is not unlike domestic violence, is you think of physical abuse. And physical abuse is obviously inflicting or threatening to inflict. A lot of people forget that. Threatening to do it is the same thing. It is just as actionable as doing it. Injury to a vulnerable adult or depriving them of basic needs. And I should also tell you from the get-go, this is basically divided into several different pieces. First, I'm going to talk about sort of the definitions of what elder abuse is and what we see, just so we know it when we see it. The second, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the statistics about elder abuse right now, which are pretty staggering and something that we need to keep in mind. Then I'm going to talk about Indiana law and how we react as a state to elder abuse. And then I'm going to talk about what Indiana law does. You know, what our best practices are. Did anybody see that wall out there that was the Ore Iron Company? Mom, I don't know if you saw that because you kind of walked right past it. I'll show it to you afterwards. It's a big cement, and it says Ore Iron Company, and I don't know if it was the original facade to the building or what it was. But we can thank Governor Bob Orr from the 1970s for our Adult Protective Services law. Yeah, so I'm going to give you a little quick 101 on that too. And then just, talk about things that we can do as parents, as individuals, as mothers, to really think about the issue and how we can be proactive in it. So back to physical abuse, which of course is the most obvious thing when we think of any kind of abuse. But one thing that you must keep in mind, elder law and elder abuse is very much like intimate partner violence in the sense that by the time it becomes physical, there probably already has been an awful lot of emotional, psychological abuse beforehand. So usually elder abuse, if you see physical symptoms of it, then it's probably been around for a while. But now this is just the first physical manifestation you have seen. Also it included emotional abuse, mental pain, anguish, bullying of older people, taking advantage of limited capacities. I was working with a woman in West Central Indiana, rural Indiana, and she was an intimate partner violence survivor. Her husband had abused her when she was a young woman, and then as they grew older, he continued to abuse her, but he switched gears and it became very psychological because he lost the physical capacity to physically abuse her. So what he would do is, I remember this was just amazed me, when she would take a nap in the afternoon, he would rearrange the furniture. Or he would take one of 2 or 3 of her favorite pairs of shoes. So she was constantly looking for a shoe, tripping over something as soon as she got up. And then he would react with saying, "You're crazy. You're getting old. You've got dementia. You know, so you need me to take care of you." So she never felt completely safe trying to reach out and ask for help because she thought it was always her fault. But that was his way of sort of domestically terrorizing her into staying there and controlling her. But that was, for sure, emotional abuse. Sexual abuse, whether consensual, any kind of sexual abuse, which happens much more often than you think. I had a client about 3 years ago, and I'm really not going to turn this into, hey, I had a client once, but I had a client once. I've been doing this a while, so I had a client once who was, it was very interesting because she was repeatedly sexually assaulted, not in a painful way, but she was sexually assaulted by her nephew. Yeah, her nephew would grab her occasionally, and while he thought it was funny, it was degrading for her, and it was taking her power away from her, and she wasn't comfortable saying anything to her daughter, and she wasn't comfortable saying anything to anybody in the family because she was afraid people would tell her that she was making it up. You know, because all of the shame issues that people have that are in intimate partner violence relationships, you have them as a victim of elder abuse, but it's more so because you think, well, then no one's going to believe me because I'm older. You know, I mean, how many survivors in intimate partner violence relationships will not report because they're embarrassed? Take that and multiply it by 10, and that's what it's like for somebody of elder abuse to actually report, because not only are they, you know, old and senile and crazy, they're automatically not believable because of it. So emotional abuse, sexual abuse, certainly. Exploitation, which is an increasing form of abuse. Misusing funds. Scams. I think the presentation right before this one was on identity theft. And at the end of this, I'm just going to go through a lot of, this is what we need to be careful of, and this is what we need to watch out for. Neglect. Failure or refusal by those responsible to provide food, shelter, a safe haven. Listen. Abandonment, the desertion of someone that is vulnerable or of limited capacity. Making sure that, not giving full thought to if what they're wearing is weather appropriate. Do they have transportation? Do they have money with them? Are they able to get around? Are they assisted with their cane or with their walker? Are they able to stay in contact with the people that they love and trust? Are they able to stay social with their friends? If you are in care and control of someone, that's all very important to who they are as an individual. And self-neglect. This is very, very common now. People that are isolated from other people and they're older, they have a tendency to just, fall into a depression, neglect themselves, stop reaching out for assistance. I just got I don't know if this is really related in any way, but it makes me think about this. I just got one of those news tweets on my phone, and apparently Robin Williams had early onset Parkinson's disease.
Really?
Yeah. So whether that had something to do with his, withdrawing, retreating, not reaching out for assistance, if you're already in a very depressed state, all of that is very, very critical, especially when you're of an advanced age. Bottom line statistics, 1 in 7 Americans aged 65 or older are somehow either injured, exploited, or mistreated by someone who is entrusted with their care. That's pretty staggering, 1 in 7 Americans. According to the Center for Disease Control, 1 in 14 cases of elder abuse is reported. That means 13 or not. The median age for an abuse victim is 76.5 years of age. Most are Caucasian and most are women. I am not surprised by that at all. Perpetrators. Where are the perpetrators of elder abuse coming from? They're coming from the family. This is largely a family issue. Not to be confused with keep it in the family. But it's largely a family issue. Spouse, intimate partners, adult children, other family members, to a much smaller extent, friends and neighbors or service providers. But the bottom line is the perpetrators of elder abuse are largely family. Which is sad, obviously. This is the greatest generation. And what we are finding here is that those that are abused are much more likely to die at an earlier age. Or fall into a situation where they are depressed and subsequently neglecting themselves. Not seeking medical treatment if they're ill, not working with people for emotional counseling. Risk factors for being abused: poor health, inability to perform activities, cognitive impairment. A lot of these do make sense. Living with others, social isolation, depression, mental or physical impairment. Being female is actually a risk factor. Being female is obviously a risk factor for intimate partner violence too. Being pregnant actually increases your risk of being battered. You would think it would decrease it, but it actually increases your risk. And being over 85. So much for the statistics. Let's move on to some of the laws so we know how Indiana is actually dealing with this. It's all focused on the idea of what an endangered adult is in this state of Indiana. And we've got two different versions of endangered adult. It is defined under Indiana Code Section 1210.3.2, both A and B. A does not refer to an older population, but B does. So the most basic parts of this is you have to be at least 18 years old, of some sort of limited capacity, whether, and on A it says mental illness, mental retardation, dementia, habitual drunkenness, excessive use of drugs, some sort of limited capacity, and then harmed or threatened with harm as a result of neglect, battery, or exploitation. I want to really underline the or threatened with harm, because under this statute, you do qualify as an endangered adult if you're over 18 of limited capacity, as it says in Section 2, and are threatened with harm as a result of these activities. That's a pretty broad definition. in a lot of ways. And it's important to remember that definition, because what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is we all have a mandatory obligation, mandatory legal obligation to report the abuse of an endangered adult in the state of Indiana. And I'll bring that home here in a few minutes. That's 1210.32a. This is 1210.32b, which is very much like the code section before it, except this is what's really focusing on elders. Incapable by reason of mental illness, mental retardation, dementia, or other physical or mental incapacity of managing or directing the management of the individual's property, or providing or directing the provision of self-care. So when we say endangered adult in the state of Indiana, it's over 18. It is somehow of diminished capacity for a variety of different reasons, and it is threatened or harmed by battery or neglect. Okay. Now that's really key, because most of our statute, our criminal statutes and some of our civil statutes that refer to elder abuse are all focused on this. They're all focused on this particular definition. Any questions about that so far? And let me just throw this out. If anybody wants more information about this, or any law review articles, or anything about anything more specific about any of this, just shoot me an email. I'm going to leave some business cards here, and I'd be happy to either answer questions. I do a tremendous amount of legal triage in this area, and I work with provider member programs all over, so I'm pretty responsive when it comes to emails. So if anybody has any further questions about this, let me know. All right, happy to help. These are our abuse statutes in the state of Indiana. Let me throw this out here, because there's always a little bit of confusion about this. Indiana, for the first time since 1977, rewrote our criminal code in the last 2 years. Section 35 of the Indiana Code is all about the crimes in the state of Indiana. And up until about a year ago, we had 4 different levels of felonies. We had A felony, B felony, C felony, and D felony. And then when we recodified Section 35, we changed those A, B, C, and D to levels. And that is just going into effect now. So that's why everything I put on here has both. Because July 1st, it was a D felony. Or no, June 30th, it was a D felony. July 1st, it was a level 5. So if you see what I mean, we're going from A, B, C, and D to levels 1 through 6. Okay, so that's why that is there. So battery against an endangered adult, as is defined in the previous statute, is a D felony, or now what's called a level 5. And the way the felonies work is A, B, C, and D. So it's still a felony, which is considered a major crime, but it's a lower level major felony. Okay. Anyone surprised that battery against an endangered adult is just a D felony? Should it be higher? Okay. You know, domestic battery against your intimate partner, is a misdemeanor. Okay. And beating a vertebrate animal is a felony. Last I checked, your intimate partner usually has a vertebrae. You know? Sorry, that's, you know. Isn't that amazing? And when I was dropping off my stuff at the recycling bin the other day, you know how they have those big green, and I saw this sign on the side of it. It said, taking anything out of this dumpster, you know, dumpster diving, I guess, is a D felony. And I thought, and it's a misdemeanor to beat your wife. What part of this am I not getting here? So, yes, beating a vertebrate animal with the intent of terrorizing that animal is a D felony, but misdemeanor domestic battery is an A misdemeanor. Yes,
Just off the record, did they change the misdemeanors? Are they still A, B, and C too?
No, misdemeanors are no women. They did not change them. They are the same. So we got level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 felony, and then A, B, C, and D misdemeanors. Yeah. So domestic battery is an A misdemeanor, which means it's one shy of a felony. It's escalated to a felony if it's battery with a child under 16 present.
So if somebody, the kid sees.
So if the kid sees it, then it's a felony, or if it's a second offense. Okay, so a little tidbit of information there for you. So battery against an endangered adult is a level 5 or what was considered a D felony. Battery against an endangered adult causing serious bodily injury rises it to a level 4 felony. And battery against an endangered adult resulting in death is a level 2 felony or a B felony. I don't know why it's not an A. I don't know why it's not a level 1 felony.
That's awful.
So this is what and I was a prosecutor for 11 years. So what I think is sort of the challenge is when law enforcement arrives on the scene and they do the report and then and you're doing the probable cause affidavit when you're charging them, how do you determine what the difference is between battery resulting in death for an older person and just murder? I mean, I would imagine it has to do with the mens rea and the criminal intent, but it is what it is. I didn't make it, I'm just telling you about it. This is an interesting statute that I did not know existed. Non-support of a parent is actually a criminal offense.
Good.
Yeah. So Mom, do you need gas money or anything?
How about our friends?
No, that is not in there. I looked really, really hard for that part. Yes, because if you have the legal obligation to take care of your parent and you are not doing it and you have the means to do it, you can be charged criminally. What I did not have the time to do is I would like to research that and see if there's any case law on this. Because what I'd like to see if this has gone up to the Court of Appeals, I didn't even know the statute existed. So if anybody's curious about that, send me an email and that'll remind me to research it because I would really like to see if there's been any cases on that. Exploitation of a dependent or endangered adult. Financial exploitation, very, very common. It is a misdemeanor most of the time. This includes social security pilfering, and the crossover level seems to be right around $10,000. If it's over $10,000 that you're taking advantage of them financially for, or if the person that you are taking advantage of is over the age of 60, then it pops it up to a felony. Okay, so it's a misdemeanor if it's under 10 grand or the person's under 60. Once you go over 60 and over 10 grand, it's a D felony. So if you're going to do it and you're going to go over 10 grand, go older.
She should be able to sing now.
Oh, hey. Did I really need this?
Yeah, I think so.
Really? Okay.
Because it's loud over there.
Lord have mercy. Okay. I'm just going to start over, okay? This is my mom, and she has a broken wrist. Okay, let me just review this like quick. If it's over 10 grand or if the victim is over 60, then it pops it up from a misdemeanor to a felony. Battery, neglect, or exploitation of an endangered adult. This is... this is the one that's a Class B misdemeanor. And the reason why it's a Class misdemeanor or Class B misdemeanor is because it's a lesser amount. Okay? And if it's a lesser amount, it's obviously a lesser crime. Now, our response to elder abuse. Our response to elder abuse has actually been pretty stellar in the state of Indiana. We have created what's called an Adult Protective Services Network in the state of Indiana, and it is designed to be the first responders to incidents of elder abuse. And all over the United States, all of the states have created similar units, but Indiana's is unique, and it's different than every single other one because ours is housed in the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Let's see if I have that yet. I'll explain that in a second. Let me go, sorry, I'm getting way ahead of myself. It dates back to 1985, Governor Bob Orr. He is the one that signed 1210.3 into law, which is the Adult Protective Services statute. That's the one that actually defines what endangered adult is. And it's all about adult protective services. That's our statute. It was created by the legislature. It's funded by the legislature, but it's housed at the Indiana Prosecuting Attorney's Council. And that is unique to every other APS in the country. We have the only adult protective services agency that is housed within the Prosecuting Attorney's Council. They're not social service workers. They're under the umbrella of the prosecutor. So the Vanderbilt County Prosecutor's Office has an adult protective services director. Okay? I used to be a deputy prosecutor, and my office was next to the adult protective services person. And that person went out on every single call investigating elder abuse. And they have a statutory obligation to do that.
How large of a staff does that office have?
I think it varies by county. It varies county by county. I know in Marion County, the APS staff is probably about 20. I don't know what it here is in Vanderbilt County, but I think it's probably consistent with the population. It's probably not enough, but I'm not sure they have enough prosecutors to do anything. But yes, yeah, it really kind of varies. Mom?
To your knowledge, who generally turns in an abuser? I mean, obviously, if the family is 62% of the family doing the abusing, in your knowledge, do you know who is the?
I think it's all over the map. Mom just asked me who is usually a reporter of abuse, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But we all should be, okay? And I'll touch on this again in a few minutes. But there are two ways in Indiana where there's a mandatory reporting law, and that's for every single one of us. There's a mandatory reporting child abuse law, and there's a mandatory reporting elder abuse law, or endangered adult abuse law. Those are the only two times where we have a mandatory obligation to report. So if you know of someone that is under this definition, an endangered adult, which means over 18 of limited capacity and is either in danger or in fear of being in danger because of abuse or neglect, you should call the hotline. And I'll talk more about that because that's a scary thing to do. And it is a scary thing to do, but in this statute, they have put lots of provisions in there to make it less scary. So I'm getting there. Okay, so how does the APS system work in Indiana? We have 18 hub prosecutors. Indiana is the only state in which the APS workers are not social service personnel. And I put good stuff there because that's an editorial comment on my part. But what I have heard is that's a good thing. Because if they're connected with law enforcement, because they're connected with the Indiana Prosecuting Attorney's Council, and because they're housed in local prosecutors' offices, our prosecutors are much more likely to file resulting criminal charges, as opposed to getting the referral from a social service agency. Okay. Because the priorities are to decrease the threat to vulnerable adults, but also hold perpetrators accountable. It's important because abusive perpetrators, not unlike domestic violence perpetrators, not unlike child abuse perpetrators, a lot of this is a pattern of behavior. So even if that particular abuse stops, the chances that person's going to move on to somebody else are greater. They're not isolated incidences as much as it's a pattern of controlling behavior. So the idea that not only are you trying to create an environment where vulnerable adults are safer, but holding perpetrators accountable and making sure that they are held accountable for what they're doing is just as important, so they don't go on to abuse someone else. APS investigators are charged with the investigation of all complaints which allege abuse, neglect, exploitation of an endangered adult. And from what my experience has been, they are very good at it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering,
I was pulled into a case like this. I'm a psychologist, and what I'm wondering is if one of the adult children has gotten him or herself appointed as guardian, then is there anything that APS can do if that person's being exploited?
As an attorney, okay, I'm responding to this as what I would say is, first of all, I always want to know more. So if the adult child is the guardian, was the person incapacitated at the time? I would want to know.
I was called in to evaluate whether the person needed a guardian, and in fact, he had minor memory problems, but certainly was quite capable of making decisions in his own behalf. But the adult child had gone to the judge and gotten the judge to give a temporary order of guardianship. And in the next few weeks, the adult child had basically wiped him out.
Oh.
And in fact, I was the second person to test. And then the adult child went on to get a third psychologist to test, trying to find one who would say that the person was incapacitated. And also, the other thing is, the one who got himself appointed as guardian got restraining orders against the close friends, so that the person lost his the elder. And it happened when the person had knee replacement, developed complications, was put in a nursing home, and that opportunity was taken.
Wow. I forgot your question.
What I wonder, so, I said to the nursing facility, I said, this person needs to, be represented and have APS involved, but, they said, oh, yes, everybody's, well, the elder had gotten himself a lawyer, but,
If APS was not involved, they should have been. I bet they are probably now. I'm glad he's got representation.
But he was in his 80s, but he was still working his farm. So he was good enough to work his farm, but then when he had the knee replacement, of course, he couldn't do that, and apparently.
Well, here is my question. How did his son have the ability to go to court on his behalf without him being present?
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, that's what elders think POA, they can do whatever they want. I mean, a lot of elders think that they even have power of attorneys, that their families can do whatever they want. Not even guardianship. They think that their adult children can do whatever they want financially.
He's furious. The gentleman was furious about it, but it was thought that the adult child knew the judge, but I can't verify that. But that was done instant, that was like, boom, okay, you're the guardian. So,
Well, guardians have to go, they have hearings and they have to go back into court and prove, they have to have all their receipts and they have to have proof of showing exactly what the money was spent and for care, and they have to go back into court and show all of those records.
Right.
If you're a guardian and you're doing that, so I don't see how he can prove, if he went and spent the money on himself or got that money out, how he can go back into court unless there was some kind of situation like you're saying, that the judge was a friend, because you're supposed to do that every so often, like every 3 months or 6 months. Those guardians are supposed to go into court and be held responsible for all those payments and things and show exactly what you're doing with the elder's money. So I don't know how he's getting away with that.
retirement accounts and everything into his
Wow.
Then he should be brought on charges.
Yeah, the term that's coming to my mind, and it's a legal term, and it's horsewhipped. And I'm not too sure. Actually, I would be very curious to see if he's being criminally responsible for that, because there was a case like that in, I want to say, Park County, where there was something similar, where they ended up bringing charges against the son and going back and getting restitution to pay the father back, which was a brilliant move by that judge, which is actually what should happen. So if you want to talk about it after this, I'd be happy to talk about it.
I was furious about it. So I would like to know
Well, and if there's one downside to APS being a part of the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council is, especially with things like all of the statutory changes that are going on right now, IPAC, the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council, is going through a tremendous amount of training right now. They're training all their brand new baby prosecutors. They're training all of their prosecutors all over the state about what the new criminal codes are and what the and the expungement law, which is really big now because it's changing about every 10 minutes. They're doing all of this training with all of this, and where I am concerned is this is going to fall off the radar. So we got to make sure our APS people are still, we're channeling some training dollars towards them too, because as our population ages, so will the elder abuse issues, So it's not something we can afford to let drop off our radar. So that's a big concern of mine. IPAC's got way too much to do and way little money to do it, and I'm concerned that they're not spending as much time on APS as they could. But I'd be happy to talk to you
Yeah, I
afterwards.
would like to,
Sure.
there's other details that I'm not gonna.
And again, I'm going to leave some business cards up here too, so if anybody wants to ever shoot me an email or give me a buzz, absolutely. Okay, this is actually a map of the Adult Protective Services hubs. This is our APS hub here in southern Indiana, and that's the number that you would call. This is also online, and I can also email it to you. If you want a big, handy, colorful map, I'd be happy to send it to you. But those have all of the hotlines on them, and those are the numbers that you call when you are suspecting adult elder abuse. Mandatory reporting. In the United States, there are only 6 states that do not have mandatory reporting laws when it comes to the abuse of an older population or endangered adults, as we define it here in Indiana. One of them is Colorado, and I just have to do a shout out. My brother lives in Colorado, so you don't want to go there, Mom.
So does my son.
Yeah, stay here. Colorado, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, they do not have mandatory reporting laws for elder abuse. We do here in Indiana, of course, and that's under 354613. So we have a mandatory reporting requirements in 2 situations: child abuse and abuse of endangered adults. Switching hats really quickly, there has been some movement to create a mandatory reporting law for domestic violence survivors, but we have not done that. Why do you think we have not done that? Mandatory reporting requirements. Some people are saying, you know what, somebody with, that's beaten up by their husband or wife and they go to the hospital, we should make it a legal obligation for the nurses to pick up the phone and call. Why is Bingo, right there. And as you know, the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, we argued against one. Because if you make people leave abusive relationships, their lethality goes through the window. It goes through the roof.
Say that again.
If you make people leave before they're ready to leave, their lethality goes up. Lethality, the chances of them getting hurt. Yeah. I'll give you an example. There was a case in Bloomington a couple of years ago where an older woman was beaten up by her husband very, very badly. And, well, she's older, she's, my age, menopause, and, sorry, TMI. And, but she went to the emergency room and she had injuries and she said that she fell off a horse. She said she fell off a horse and they were treating her, but they were suspecting something was going on because she had puncture wounds. And it's pretty difficult to get a puncture wound when you fall off a horse. So they were kind of wondering. Meanwhile, her husband was at her side and would not leave her side, following her all around the ER, no, I need to go in there, I need to go in there. So finally they got them separated because they said they were going to do a GYN exam or something like that, which is very smart on Bloomington Hospital's part. But they got them separated and they got in front of her and they said, look, we think you've been hurt. Is this a domestic violence issue? We're not going to do anything unless you want us to do something, but we need to know what we're treating. And she's like, no, I'm fine, leave me alone, let me go home. So they treat her, and she's just about to go home with her husband, and then her older mother shows up, and says, don't let her go home with him. He's been attacking her, and I know he hit her with, actually what he ended up hitting her with was a fireplace poker. So he beat her up with a fireplace poker, and that's what caused the injuries. So the older mom is like, hey, hospital, you cannot let this woman go, because then he's going to kill her. And the woman, who was not on medications at the time, she wasn't anything, she said, you need to let me go. I just want to go home. I just want to go home. So the hospital didn't have any choice. They let her go home. They drove 3 blocks down the road and he killed her. So then the family of the deceased woman sued the hospital, saying that they didn't do their due diligence to protect her. So this goes to trial court level, Indiana Court of Appeals, and eventually the Indiana Supreme Court. And the Indiana Supreme Court came back and said, you know what? People that are victims of abuse, they are not of limited capacity. It's a complicated issue. You can't make them leave, because if you do leave, when you think about that case, what exactly was the trigger for him to kill her? The knowledge, all of a sudden, and this is what I would argue, having been doing this for about 20 years, this is what I would argue is all of a sudden he was outed in front of all of those people. So even if he did get a chance to take her home, he felt threatened enough where he wanted ultimate control. And it's just a complicated, twisty issue anyway. But when you start taking that control away from the person who is living on control, that's when they're much more likely to go nuts. So there is no mandatory reporting law for domestic violence offenses, because in the end, it has to be a decision to be made by the person when they're ready to do it, which is frustrating, and it's a difficult area to work in, but it is what it is. So mandatory reporting for child abuse and abuse of an endangered adult. So that means that if you think it's going on, you need to report it. This is the Adult Protective Services statewide hotline, 1-800-992-6978. If anybody wants this information or a copy of this PowerPoint, I'm happy to send it to you. That line, actually, when I was preparing this PowerPoint, and because I knew that line had been around for a while, I called it just to make sure it was still relevant. Last thing I want to do is give you a hotline that doesn't work. That's annoying, and it is. It is answered by somebody at the State House with the state APS agency during the day, and at night it goes to a hotline number, hotline direct service provider. So this is what the obligation to report is. When you're making a report, name, age, and address of the endangered adult. This is all if possible, of course. Name and address of family members or other persons that are responsible for the person. The apparent nature and extent of the alleged battery, neglect, or exploitation. The name and address and telephone number of the reporter, and the basis for their knowledge. So all of the relevant information basically on that situation, whether it's a neighbor or a relative or yourself. Mom, you asked who actually makes these kinds of reports? Individuals. Individuals should feel empowered to make that report. Family members. If you're in a situation where you think your parent is being abused by a brother or a nephew or a niece, that's our obligation. Indiana's witness reporting requirement. These are 2 different parts of this code that are actually designed to make this more palatable for people, because it is kind of scary to make this kind of report. So what this is saying is a person who believes or who has reason to believe that someone is an endangered adult and fails to make that report, they could be charged with it being a misdemeanor. Okay? So if you know what's going on and you don't say anything, you could be charged. We have a similar statute when it comes to child abuse. If you know what's going on and you're failing to report, you could be charged. How many think that, well, what if I make the call and I'm wrong? And somebody's going to turn around and sue me? Okay, that's a very real concern. Real enough where they actually made the immunity clause. 1210.311 says there is explicit protection provided for people that make these kinds of reports and make them in good faith. So if you're really, really worried about somebody down the street and you think that they're going through an abusive situation and you make that report, you are immune from having any sort of liability because you made that report in good faith. Okay. Questions? I have kind of flown through this. I have a couple of case examples from a couple of things that I have worked on in the past. Let me put my eyeballs in. Okay, here's a couple of things that I have worked on in the past, and I wanted to, I'm going to give you a quiz. See what you think. This one was really, is it this one? Yeah, this is a good one. Leonard has been diagnosed with dementia. His son Aaron moved into his home. Leonard pays Aaron to provide him with care and assistance. Aaron has been inconsistent in helping Leonard, and he frequently gets home late in the evening. As is common with many individuals with Alzheimer's disease, Leonard has begun to wander outside the house during these evening hours. He is often confused about where he is and how to get home. When neighbors express concern about these incidents, Aaron explains that there is little he can do about his father's wandering. What do you think? I know this case involves a family member assuming responsibility for an older adult, but is Aaron doing his due diligence? No, he is not. It could be a case of neglect. Yeah. And keep in mind, again, that's actionable under Indiana law, and even if it's not charged as a criminal offense, it is something that APS can get involved with and offer services and assistance. Okay? APS's first line of defense is not to narc you out so you get charged, somebody gets criminally charged. If it's appropriate, that'll happen. But their first concern is for the victim. Okay? It's for that older person. So if there's a reason why his son cannot provide services, then APS is there to try to fill those gaps. Okay? So it takes away some of the fear of calling, because the idea here is not supposed to be punitive from the get-go. Yes, ma'am?
In that case, it's not relevant, or does it make a difference whether the son is getting paid or not paid? Or does that have a bearing?
I think it does to a certain extent in this, because I think the son is getting paid for assisting his father. I think there's a contractual obligation here. And I'm going to put on my lawyer hat here and say, even if you are, my best recommendation is if you enter into a relationship or if an older person enters into a relationship with someone as far as their caregiving, it needs to be contractual. Okay, I don't mean to be all cold as ice on you, but the older person has to have some sort of protection. And it really should be in paper, and it should be contractual, and it needs to be spelled out. Because there has to be some sort of, there has to be a rule book. So I would offer that. I don't know, when you're talking about elder law attorneys in the city of Evansville or in this area, I don't know how many there are, but there's quite a few up in Indianapolis. And if you ever want a referral to the for an elder abuse attorney, shoot me an email, because I'm the immediate past president of the Indianapolis Bar Association, so we work a lot with all of the legal entities up there. So if I don't know one, I bet I can find one. So let me know. Are you heckling me? No. All right. So yes, that is definitely, I think it's a potential situation for neglect. He is a family member. He's being paid to provide care. So to a certain extent, he has assumed sort of an affirmative duty to care for Leonard. And I think it's arguable if he's actually doing that. But again, if best case scenario is to make any kind of agreements like that contractual in nature. Okay. Next one. Lolita has been struggling with with reduced mobility. She recently decided that living on her own was no longer safe, so she moved in with her daughter Tanya. When she moved in, Lolita gave money to help pay for household expenses. Tanya has begun using the money to pay for outings with her friends. When asked if she gave permission for Tanya to use the money in this way, Lolita shrugs no, but she says she won't let me stay with her unless she can use the money the way she wants to. Thoughts and reflections? Thanks, Mom. Well, that's not good. All right. Well, again, this is one of those situations where it's a financial agreement and it's between family members, and best case scenario is to get this in writing. If you're going to contribute a certain amount of money towards household expenses or some kind of care, best thing you can do is put down exactly what it's for. This is for 1/3 of the rent and for groceries. This is for helping me do this, helping me do that. The more explained it is, I think the better it is. Because ultimately, if the person is not meeting that due diligence and meeting that obligation that they are agreeing to, they need to be held accountable for that. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
A situation kind of related to that. I saw a woman recently who's in a nursing facility, at least I hope she still is. She goes in and out, because what happens is when she's in, once her Medicare days are out, her daughter puts pressure on her to come back home because they depend on her check. But she's really not, they can't or don't provide the care that they really need to at home. So it's this cycle. The nursing facility knows what's going to happen. Is there anything we can do when she's in the facility? Because historically, when I call APS, when people are still in the facility, APS will say, well, they're safe now. You can't do anything now. And they won't investigate it further. They say, call back when they discharge. But then it's frustrating.
So when she discharges, she goes back to the home at her family's,
Her daughter's home.
because her daughter wants her there because of the check.
Yes.
But then they are not physically taking care of her, or?
No, her medical needs probably exceed what the family can do anyway, but the family isn't together. There's been medication abuse allegations in the past too. I don't know exactly the truth of all of it, but I don't know how much of it's neglect and how much of it is that they truly cannot provide to her the level of care that she needs.
Okay.
So she goes in and out, and we keep seeing her. And every time, historically when we call APS, if they're in the hospital or in the nursing home, they always say, well, they're in a safe environment now.
But yet, who's gonna call when she goes home?
Well, and that's the thing, because we don't know, we don't hear. We
Right.
go in and do consultations, so we don't hear. So, I spoke with the social worker at the nursing facility, and their plan is to call APS even if they start talking discharge, to go ahead and call APS, because they're very concerned about this woman. Last time she ended up, the daughter's a mess, but she ended up in a hotel, and it was very bad, and APS did get involved and had her come in, but then they drop it off. It's just
She just keeps going in and out.
So when her physical health deteriorates to the point where she goes into the facility, and then she gets better, and then she moves out, and then she's neglected again, or whatever, and then
Well,
she.
when they can't pay anymore, like when Medicare days
When
are up.
Medicare days are up, then their check goes to the nursing facility.
Okay.
Families don't like that when families, and we've seen this more than once. Families don't like that because they depend on that check, so then they start putting pressure on a family member to get out and go back home because they want that.
They need that money.
They need that money.
They rely on their money to live. They want the Social Security check, pension checks. So they rely on that elder's money to live, basically. Several family members, a lot of times, are in the home of that elder.
Okay.
But we just see it just over and over, and it seems like there's nothing you can do to stop the cycle.
Does she have the option of just moving to another facility, just her, and, and her money? I mean, I would be happy to talk to you about this, I really would, because I'm very curious about this.
She's on Medicare and Medicaid, so she doesn't have the income to pay for assisted living. She's probably higher level of care. Really, she needs long-term nursing facility placement. This particular woman, although we've seen lots of similar over the years, but this particular woman really needs. She does fine in the nursing facility, but when she goes home, she very quickly destabilizes.
Right.
And it's just frustrating because you know exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
And it's just, and I'm just afraid one of these days.
How is her mental state? I mean, is she aware of all of this?
She is. I mean, there's others where it's not the case, but she is. But she gets that that emotional pressure from her daughter, and so she feels guilty. And so she goes home.
Which is mental abuse,
Yeah,
which is
that's
just
it.
every bit as bad as physical
Yeah.
abuse, and probably in a lot of ways worse.
But it's just, you know, when we see it, just feels helpless from our end because we know what's going to happen, and we're afraid one of these days she's going to deteriorate to the point where it's, you know,
She's not going to be, yeah.
it just seems like there's nothing because they can't prove it.
Well, and not unlike other sort of forms of abuse, I think that the big, the big hurdle here is for her to take control over her own life and not feel compelled to take care of everybody else, which is a huge if. But if she has the ability to take charge of her, I mean, it's her money, it's her stuff. If she has the ability to say no to her daughter, that's going to be step one.
For this particular woman, it's a lifetime pattern, so I just like have a hard time seeing it.
It is just, it is domestic violence, but it's just not an intimate partner.
Right, yeah.
Counseling, empowering people to be able to make those decisions away from that person that coerces them, because that's terrorism. It's domestic terrorism.
It is.
Whether it's your daughter, your husband, or your sister, or whoever.
But she'll defend the daughter to the end of the earth. I mean, she'll.
I'll be happy to talk to you afterwards, which is another way of saying I'm really not sure. Any other questions I can't answer? All right, so here's some tips. And not really tips, but just things to remember. And when I was jotting these down after looking at a few articles, it makes me think about my own family. It makes me think about, my fiance's parents and the parents of the people that I love, and myself as we get older. But things that we need to remember to help us age gracefully and to help us stay active. Because it all feeds into the same thing. It really does. Avoiding isolation. I think about the Robin Williams issue. Early onset Parkinson's, history of depression, history of substance abuse issues. He got into a dark and twisty place, clearly. But socializing, being able to tell people how you feel in a safe environment. I really appreciated what you said, Mom, in one of those last panels where you said you like being able to talk to girlfriends your age about what's going on in your life. Is this normal? I do too. I mean, because we all have things that are going on and you're wondering, is that just me? Or, is that normal? Am I, really? Can I do that? But we all like doing that, and it's nice to know that you can do that at any age, especially as we all go through different health things. Lord have mercy, God knows I've read enough books on menopause. But the whole sadness and the depression that comes with isolation and how it can be such a downward slope, it really can. So avoiding isolation, keeping in touch with family members, and I'm going to publicly chastise my mom on this one because I think older adults have a tendency to think that they're nothing but a burden on their family. Really? Amen? Do I get an amen?
Amen.
Okay. All right. Well, here's the thing. Speaking as one of those younger people, you're not. You're really not. So don't feel like you can't ask family members for stuff, because it's not as bad as you think, okay? We really, we love our parents for the most part, and we want to be able to help you. I wish my mother would come stay with me more. Okay, and Mom's starting to give me that look. Okay, sorry, Mom. Stay active. Stay physically active. Obviously, don't be around people with negative behaviors. People with power and control issues that are physically explosive, mentally abusive, coercive, that kind of person. Dissuade any of that kind of contact. Hey, I just texted you. How come you didn't text me back? What's going on with that? All of that is just negative behavior. Be cautious about your financial decisions. Be very cautious about your financial decisions. Don't contract any of your financial power away unless you talk to somebody that you trust. And I'm a big one in talk to a lawyer first, but talk to someone you trust before you contract any of your financial power away. Because that is your power, that's your control, and you do not want to give that up for anybody. Okay? I'm going to let you go now because I've gone on too far, but thank you all very much. If you have any questions, I'll leave some stuff up.